the CT Sports Talent Show. My name is Christopher Saunders, and I'm pleased to have on, without introducing him enough, because I'm sure a lot of people know him from the past, the present, obviously what he's doing in the future now in the sports aspect. Joe D'Ambrosio is with me here. And Joe, I appreciate you coming on, man.
Christopher, good to be with you. It's a pleasure.
It's always fun to be able to talk with somebody who's been a part of the broadcast scene for what is now multiple generations. You could really make the case as far as how it's grown, right? And I want to talk about with you so many things from the sports aspect to some teams that we were just discussing as well. But I want
Sure.
to turn the page back for a second. How did you get into the sports scene? I'd love to hear that.
It's what I always wanted to do from the time I was 8 or 9 years old. And once I came to the pretty easy realization that I wasn't going to be much of an athlete, I was always intrigued by the radio and TV, would listen to Yankee games and Mets games and Red Sox games when I was a kid
Mm-hmm.
growing up in Hartford. Went to Connecticut School of Broadcasting in the summer of 72.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't get my first job till summer of 78 at what was then WLIS in Old Saybrook. And, you know, 45 years later, here we are.
There's so much as far as everyone talks about, okay, this was like my first break, or this person gave me my first opportunity. For you, when was your first true break that kind of allowed you to get into the scene?
Well, I just think getting my first job, it was ironic. I didn't look for much work because I had some uh, parents situations going on
Mhm.
after I got out of CSB, and my father was working at the Old Saybrook transfer station. I was living in Old Saybrook at the time, working at a grocery store. And John Powers, the general manager from WLIS, came in, and my father started talking to him and said, "My kid wants to get into broadcasting." And John had a weekend opening. So he said, "Come to the station." So I
Mhm.
did. So I started off doing Saturdays and Sundays when WLIS was just a daytimer, 4:30 to 8:15, playing music. And then sports eventually became part of the deal once the midday guy moved on to Middletown. And I guess the biggest break was getting your foot in the door at Uconn. Um, I did some games 84, 85 for the great Marty Glickman when he would have some issues getting to stores, either traffic or accidents or stuff like that. And I guess that was the biggest break. And then in '92, when
Mhm.
WTIC got the Uconn package, and I was working at WPOP at the time, doing sports and news back
Mhm.
when it was an all news station. And the late Arnold Dean hired me to come in and do the Uconn games, and that turned out to be a godsend.
The amount of, not even history, because that's one aspect, but the amount of memories that you have created, obviously people have seen throughout the years of Uconn sports. And obviously the basketball team has had many, many, most recently last year for boy or not boys, but men's basketball, I should say.
That's a high
Obviously,
school guy saying
yes,
boys.
I know. Girls and boys, but in college, it's
Right.
men and women. I know the women have had a obviously long track record as well. I know of late it's been very hard to replicate that, but it's not very easy to do. We can go on about that forever. Is there any particular timeline from, you could say, from start to finish, or even maybe it hasn't finished yet, that you feel like is your most fond memories as far as calling Yukon games?
Oh, I would say the 26 years, Chris, doing the games on the radio at TIC.
Mm-hmm.
4 men's national championships. I did the women's games as well
Mm-hmm.
for 10 years before we decided to split the broadcasts. Um, 4 women's national championships. I'm the only broadcaster to do both the men's and women's national championships in the same year, 2004, which had nothing to do with me, had everything to do with the players. Uh, and I would say, being at the football when they went to the Fiesta Bowl, the football game where they beat Notre Dame, their
Yeah.
first win after Jasper Howard got murdered. Um, being there for the ground floor hockey,
Mm-hmm.
doing some phenomenal baseball broadcasts, some amazing games for Jimmy's team, for Jim Pender's team.
Mm-hmm.
I would say all that. I would say it even began before that, just covering
Mm-hmm.
UConn for the Dream season in 1990. Um, watching that as a reporter, not as a play-by-play guy. Bob Husler was doing the games then.
Yep.
Um, the whole era. Because I mean, I grew up at a time when UConn basketball was still the biggest deal in the state,
Yeah.
but not to the level nationally
Yeah.
anywhere near what it is now.
Mhm.
When I was a kid growing up, I would wait for the Thanksgiving morning Hartford Courant and Hartford Times because they would have big sections on UConn basketball. They would have the roster, they'd have all the players' pictures and stuff and big stories. And this was in a time before there were all these periodicals and publications and, no sports websites or anything like that. So it's been pretty exciting. I'll tell you that.
You've been able to talk to both interview and off the either the radio or the TV side with so many people, and one in particular. And I know they did a great piece on him on ESPN when he was at St. Joe's when they were just getting the program started on the men's side. And obviously, they've had so much success in the GNAC. And I'm talking about Coach Calhoun from
Right.
UConn to obviously St. Joe's. Talk about that because for you going through so many generations of as far as people who have watched and seen UConn, for Coach Calhoun, it was almost like, not to say a second life, but it was almost like a second journey for him in a sense, going to St. Joe's.
Well, the timing was great
Mm-hmm.
for me because WTIC had just lost the rights to the UConn games, and I wanted to go to keep doing the games, but I had a year left on my contract at TIC, and I fought hammer and nail with my operations manager Steve Salhaney um, to try to get me out of the contract. And one day after we had screamed at each other for weeks, he said, "Look, let me put it in simplest terms to you." He goes, "You're a Yankee fan, right?" I go, "Yeah." He goes, "I'm a Red Sox fan." I said, "Yeah, I know. It's a pain in the ass." He said, "We're not letting Aaron Judge walk across the street to the Red Sox for free." I said, "All right, now you're going to pay me like Judge," which, yeah. But so Jim had gotten to St. Joe's, and we were looking for something to keep the sports identity alive at TIC.
Mm-hmm.
And the St. Joe's connection was perfect. We did all the home games. I did them by myself. No color commentator, just Rex McCalla, who had been our engineer for the Uconn games. Then we did their 3 games in the GNAC tournament. They lost the finals that year to Albertus Magnus.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, we didn't do them for a variety of reasons that I don't have to get into right now. But to be there that extra year with Jim and see him build the program and get to know those kids,
Mm-hmm.
most of whom, or several of whom, were still there last year,
Yep.
was a lot of fun. It was good to watch the not the second chapter of his career because obviously he had a great stint at Northeastern, which
Yep.
led to him getting the Uconn job.
No, that's a very good point. And I think some people kind of forget that before he went to UConn, like you said, he was at Northeastern, and that's kind of what led to him to that opportunity.
Well,
You
that's like UConn. That's like UConn, Chris. To interrupt you for a
yeah.
minute, as great as Jim was, UConn men's basketball didn't start with Jim. They
Mm-hmm.
they had a long history in the '60s in the Yankee Conference. They had some phenomenal players. I don't know. They had a guy named Wes Balasuknia, who, if there had been a 3-point line when he played from '65 through '68, or I don't remember the exact years now,
Mm-hmm.
'64 through '67, he would have obliterated all the records. They had a guy named Toby Kimball who became a serviceable backup in the NBA.
Uh-huh.
Then in the '70s, they had Tony Hansen and Al Weston and
Yeah.
Jeff Carr and Randy Levine. Went to a couple of NCAA tournaments. So, it didn't, UConn basketball didn't begin with Jim. And I
Mm-hmm.
think sometimes people either don't know that or forget about it. So,
I could tell you I did not know that because again, I'm only 30. So again, the
right.
history, I was born in 93, so I don't remember the 60s or 70s, but I think
Yeah, exactly.
that
Exactly. Well, you're not expected to. You're not
this is
expected to.
true. But it's awesome and it's great to be able to have you to be able to share that knowledge so people who maybe forgot now know, or like myself who did not know, now we
Right.
do. I want to go to the radio aspect because I told you before we started this interview, radio, TV, paper, sports, all that has changed so much from the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and so on. For radio broadcasting, Obviously, you've done it for so long. Has that taken a change for the positive as far as how you were able to do the radio broadcast? Because I feel like TV obviously has evolved so much, but the radio, that doesn't change because obviously people are not watching it, they're listening. So you're painting the picture. What says
Right.
you?
I totally agree. I don't think I think the equipment has changed. I think before the internet,
Hmm.
we would send the games back on telephone lines, which was always put you in a little bit of stress.
Fun.
Um, but the actual broadcast of the game, other
Hmm.
than the fact that you got a million commercials and drop-ins, and this third pitch of the first inning is brought to you by the Naugatuck Valley League. Um, the actual broadcasts haven't changed.
Yeah.
It's the best form of play-by-play because TV belongs to the color analyst and the director who's
Yep.
telling you what shots he's going to show.
Yep.
On radio, you paint the word picture. I always imagined I was broadcasting to one person, and I got to pick the brain of the guy who basically invented basketball on the radio, Marty Glickman. When he was a backup, when he was the Uconn play-by-play guy, and I became his backup, he would listen to my tapes and he would give me
Hmm.
incredible advice, which I still go by today, even though 98% of what I do is on television now. You can never be too descriptive
Hmm.
on radio. But the thing a lot of people forget in our business, Chris, got to give the score.
Yeah.
You got to give the score. There's no little bug up on the corner of the radio dial
No.
saying, Naugatuck 61, or Ansonia 57. That's not up there. You got to remember, you got to have in your head a formula as
Yeah.
to when you give the score. A lot of guys, it's when there's a first down in football.
Yeah.
Some say change of possession, but
Hmm.
that could go too long. Coming out of every break, you got to give the score.
Yeah.
But the actual nuts and bolts of doing a game has not changed.
It's funny because when I first started out at WATR, I remember there were obviously Bob Sagendorf, also the late Jim Shove, who just passed
Yep.
away about less than a year ago. He was at Holy Cross for so long. And having the older guys and obviously, Vestro, who his father was just elected to the Hall of Fame, the Hinkle
Right.
Donald Hall of Fame here in Waterbury. They always told me, all of them collectively had said, always give the time and score always every 30 seconds, or make sure that you say, because you never know who's flipping on, flipping off the radio,
Right.
maybe who lost the signal. So always, and I've done that for basketball, obviously for football, hopefully we do baseball sometime in the spring if that's possible. But it was always that tidbit. I always think of every time I'm calling a game, always making sure I get the time and score because people just don't know, especially if they're just
Right. Right. Well, basketball, it's easier because you can always give it after the basket is scored.
correct.
The other thing I think, and I
Mm-hmm.
kind of got this from watching some hockey that
Mm-hmm.
John Forsling, who used to do the Whalers and the Hurricanes, and now does the Kraken and TNT does. Um, People might be listening and they might not recognize what team a guy is on. So if you just say Saunders to D'Ambrosio to Sagendorf on the outside to Wilson, people might not know. So it's always good once in a while to throw in
Yeah.
who they're playing for,
Yep.
you know?
No, that's a good point. And, to add to that as well, I think, another aspect when I broadcast, especially basketball games, I always go in, and same thing for football too. I always make sure that I'm doing the game as if the person does not know anything as far as the teams. They don't know the coaches, none of that. Because I
Right,
always make sure I always have too many notes with me because if I don't use them all, that's fine. But it's
yep,
always good to be prepared because you just never know. Like I said, whoever's tuning in, listening, watching, whatever,
right.
may not know the teams. So now giving them a little bit of history on the teams and such.
Yeah, that's a good philosophy to have. You'll be very successful doing it that way, and your listeners will have a better broadcast, which is what, at the end of the day, it's all about.
Now, as far as for you specifically, is there any either interview, maybe a moment when you were calling a game that you will never, I know you've been a part of many, but is there one in particular that really hits home to you, really sticks
I
with
would say the 99 championship,
you?
the
Okay.
end of the 99 championship, because we knew how many people would be listening. Not everybody could be home at the time.
Mhm.
People are in their cars, people are going to work, people are doing stuff. I
Mhm.
would say the 99 championship
Mhm.
when they beat Duke. 77, 74 would be the moment. And then I would say another one would be Kemba's shot to beat Pittsburgh in the Big East quarterfinals, because
Yeah.
that's 2 o'clock in the afternoon. A lot of people couldn't be home. A lot of people would be listening online at work or sneak a radio in. And I think those are two moments that have stood out for me out of thousands, out of thousands.
I always the Kemba shot, party in Kemba, right? I mean, that's been played so many times throughout the years, and the amount of success that obviously so many UConn players have had on the basketball side. But
Right.
also too, there's been football players that have been drafted in the NFL. Baseball's had a lot of success with Coach Penders, and they've been able to produce not just from kids in Connecticut but outside. And sports at UConn is pretty good, not bad.
It's a good time. It's a good time. Football took a big step back this year.
Mhm.
Um, Obviously, the women are going through a rough patch. It's hard to believe any team could get hit with as many injuries, but the men are. Cam Spencer made three away from still being perfect. So they have lots.
Mhm.
They've reloaded, and Danny Hurley has shown himself to be an extremely good coach. Extremely good coach.
No, I agree with that. Now, Joe, before I let you go, I want to, talk to you really quick as far as with the high school football games coming up. I know you said you're going to the Bloomfield game against Cromwell Portland, and that shapes up to be obviously Cromwell won a championship just a few years ago when they
Right.
were loaded. They had multiple teams, or multiple players rather, high level. One of them actually went to Uconn, Teddy
Right.
Ball himself.
Yep.
That's his nickname. Real name was Ted, Ted Williams.
Teddy
Not
Williams. Right.
yeah, not to be, misinterpreted with the Ted Williams from the Red Sox, as
Right.
people would know. But are there any other games that you're intrigued by, or is that like the one?
That's the one. I live in Bloomfield for half the year.
Okay.
One of my best friends' wives used to be principal at Cromwell Portland, so I'd go see their games a lot. I still go see the Cromwell boys basketball games because I'm good friends with their head coach John Panone. I think it's intriguing. I always like it when not the chalk doesn't get to the finals
Yeah.
all the time. And you got a couple of things like your Watertown team hasn't been there since '86. That's amazing. you
Before I
know,
was born.
and right. And Barlow, as you said, they waxed Valley Regional. Oh, like
Yeah.
how Barlow's in double S, I don't understand. There's some of these, and I think it's going to get even more complicated
Mhm.
when we go to everybody makes the playoffs, which I am firmly against. It's Connecticut. You can get from one end of the state to 2 hours. Do we need six state champions? No. Are we going to have eight in the future? Maybe. I don't. I'm not big on that. I think high school sports are not a participation trophy. That's
Mhm.
just my personal opinion. But you've got great games. You got two teams that love to beat the crap out of each other, Darien and New Canaan. You know, North Haven is a team that doesn't get there a lot.
Mhm.
Hand, which is a perennial power against Rockville, that shapes up as a really good game. I think all six games have the potential. I don't
Mhm.
think we're going to have any 61-7 this
No.
year. I think we're going to have good competitive games.
You mentioned the amount of potential teams maybe in the future making the playoffs. I know you just said eight. There has been talk of it staying at six for some time. Also, too, I'm sure you saw the proposal that came out. The CIAC will not look at until after the season. I'd love to get your thoughts on that because there was a very strong, opinionated amongst the state as far as not getting rid of Thanksgiving, but there's other
Right.
aspects with it too. Love to get your thoughts.
Well, I think cutting down on the travel, Chris, I think is a good idea. Again, even though you can get from one end of the state to the other in 2 hours, that doesn't apply in this.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not in favor of getting rid of the
Mm-hmm.
Thanksgiving Day games, because a it's the schools big for a lot of these schools. It's the games that they make the most gate revenue at.
Yeah.
You got alumni coming back. You got parents going and stuff. More parents going and stuff. And it's just the tradition of it.
Mm-hmm.
If you play those games on Columbus Day weekend, it's just another regular season game.
Mm-hmm.
I know Al Carbone of the SEC is one of the guys who's a big proponent of this new system where
Mm-hmm.
you play teams regionally and stuff, and you just play teams in your division.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to see more about it before before I decide one way or the other.
Mhm.
But if it's going to eliminate the Thanksgiving Day games, I'm really not in favor of it. And it's funny, we I talking to a couple of coaches and getting ready for our Thanksgiving Day games. We were supposed to have another game, but something happened and we didn't.
Mhm.
If the school, the bigger schools seem to be in favor of this proposal, and the smaller schools are not. And I think that, I think I think the bigger schools are going to get their way. But we'll wait and see. We didn't think we were ever going to have a shot clock in high school basketball in the state. Now we will, and damn well it's going to. There's going to be a game that's going to have chaos because somebody's going to screw up the shot clock, and all hell's going to break loose.
Well, I could tell you, we have Mercy and Holy Cross on the girls' side, the first game to break out our season. And I can tell you right now that my partner and I will be looking like, all right, let's see how many times the shot clock. And we're not saying this because we want it to happen, but
Right.
that's just the nature of how there's going to be mix ups. There's going to be a mess up or two. And I think the biggest thing, and I hope the fans, the parents go easy on whoever's doing the shot clock. It's
Well,
going to
I
take
think the
time.
good thing is they made a decision, and this.
Yep,
It has to be an adult.
correct.
It can't be some pimply high school kid running the shot clock.
So what you're saying is hopefully it's a big dude who can fight for himself.
Right. If somebody gives him, it's like that big security guard at the Eagles game. He stuck his nose where he shouldn't the other day.
That was funny. I couldn't believe that happened. I was like, wait, I had to rewind it because I was like, did that actually just happen?
You know what? That's typical Philadelphia arrogance. That's smirking Nick Sirianni and all of his lackeys on the sideline. That's a team that can't lose enough for me.
Well, I can tell you, as a Cowboys fan for 30 years, I have not seen a conference championship in a long time, and it's been rough to say the
Yeah.
least. But hey, Joe, I appreciate you coming on. A lot of fun being able to talk with you.
Christopher,
Yeah,
my pleasure. Thanks for the invite and have a great season.
appreciate it. Thank you very much. I'll wrap things up here in the CT Sports Talent Show. So next time, stay safe. Remember, CT stands for Connecticut Talent. I'm going to try to find them all. Enjoy the day, everybody, and be well.